Okay. 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 Now let me start up the music and let's see. We'll be ready to go. Let's say. Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. All right. You too.
Oh my God.
Is it running now? Yeah. Hi, everybody. This is the Godfather Soul James Brown. I tell you, this business is on. My man is on. Check him out. This is the Godfather Soul James Brown saying stay with it and hit it. Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay. Welcome. We are simulcasting on the what are we simulcast on Innervision FM, and we're broadcasting on Zoom, YouTube, Facebook, D Live. Let's see, we share it with Rumble. Who else? A bunch of other platforms. And we'd like to welcome everybody to the Innervision FM tonight. Tonight we're gonna have a very exciting show. I've been reading the stories of this lady for like a long time, and it's like I don't know. It seemed like we went on a vacation, and then it's like, I said I should have her on the show. So tonight, Alan and I, we're gonna welcome her. Oh, also we're gonna remind you today is the day where you can get the Innervision compilation. 2021. There's a link out there on Facebook for you can
basically vote on the top 10, right?
Well, yeah, top 10, yeah, and this will get them into the top Billboard. So I know there's a lot of people that are on my Facebook. So come on, vote, and put them in your Spotify, and pick out a song and put that in your Spotify, or pick out the whole album, and then it's going to drop, as they say, on October the 1st, and then we're going to have a concert with the ones that live here in Denver on October the 2nd. But all the information is on the Facebook, and I sent out that announcement earlier, so you guys all know all about that. Yeah,
it sounds like that's going to be a lot of fun, ladies and gentlemen. We have us a lot of fun tonight. History is the most important thing. It helps us to really never forget where we came from, and it gives us direction as to where we want to get to, sort of roadmap, as it were, so that we can reach future goals. And so tonight, we've got a very special guest, Peggy Chung, and she is known as the History Lady.
Oh, yeah.
The Blind History Lady.
Yeah, thank you guys. And you can take that any way you want. I have history about blindness, but I am a blind history fanatic. I didn't like school very much when I was a kid, and I didn't like history. I didn't appreciate it.
Wow.
Yeah, and that my teachers would be shocked. But I have been researching what I now call our blind ancestors for many, many years now. And about 8-9 years ago, I decided to make it more of a project, not just for me, but for sharing the stories that I have been collecting and writing little articles about with lots of people, because I grew up in the blind community. My mother was blind. She knew all these blind people. I knew all these blind people. You know how it is when you're a kid, you know it all, right?
Yeah.
Well, I'm older now. I know I don't know it all. But
Right.
Okay.
I was really surprised in my late 20s to find out that there had been a blind congressman and U.S. senator from Minnesota. And
Oh, yeah.
I thought, if I didn't know that, how come I didn't know that? And other people should know about that. So he was my first, quote, blind ancestor that I started my research on, and have been doing that ever since.
Wow.
It's
And
very fascinating.
because I'm thinking because and sorry, leave close this window in back of me. It's like but anyway, isn't it kind of like I'm thinking like with such in certain times with such a stigma about being blind, how was it easy to get beneath the surface to find these people?
But it certainly isn't easy. And I became a bit of a genealogist in 2000. I thought I'd, do my family tree, keep me busy for the winter, right? Oops,
Well, it looks like he ducked
He
out
went-
for a second.
he went away.
Not sure whether that's just the Zoom or if. Let's take a look here. Well, hopefully he'll rejoin the Zoom. I don't know what the heck just happened there.
Well, I'm assuming we're still going.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'll just keep on talking.
All right.
But I became a genealogist in about 2000 and started taking classes. I got hooked on genealogy. And so then about 2010, when I would get stuck on my family stuff, I would take what I had learned from the classes that I had taken, and I would apply them to these news articles or this blind person that I had found out about hither and thither, and started to. I have file cabinets and boxes full of documentation now, and that's, that doesn't include what I've got stored on my computer. But it isn't that easy because they may not have identified as a blind person. The 1910 census gathered a lot of data about blind people.
Oh, yes.
And that's because they were paid more money if they found more blind people. So
Right.
if they were paid so much for, say, gathering 500 names, then if there was like 5 blind people, they get extra money.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
So that's kind of how that helped with some of it. I have learned how to generally look for terms pertinent to that time period. You want to research, let's say right now I'm looking in West Virginia, and if I am researching some of the Black folks in West Virginia who were blind, first of all, you don't Google Black and blind, you Google or you search for colored blind, because that's
right.
more
That was the term back in the day.
in West Virginia. Other states
Yes.
might have been Negro.
Yes.
But it's difficult because depending on the community you were living in, blind people were treated a lot like racial minorities in that
Yes.
we wouldn't get a last name in the paper as blind people. So, right now in West Virginia, you find the colored man who lives behind the restaurant.
Wow.
The colored blind guy who lives behind the restaurant. And we find a lot of that, or we get blind Jim who sold newspapers. No last
absolutely.
name.
Oh,
So
Absolutely.
it is kind of hard to research blind people unless you have a starting place or a little bit of information to start from. to find out a blind Jim or a blind Tom in a large community, you're pretty much sunk unless you can find something later on that will connect them together. But if you're in a small community and it's blind Ezekiel, well, you stand a chance of coming up with something. So anyway, it is harder in some ways, but it's also harder right now because we have grown so privacy conscious as a society that it is difficult. I mean, just, try and find somebody's email address online for someone you don't know or have a contact with. It can be kind of rough. So it kind of depends. If you are in certain types of very Puritan religion areas, you might find that people didn't even count them. The blind aunt who lived, or the blind grandmother who lived in the back room, just wasn't really even counted.
Yeah, I from what I've been able to glean from our blind history, the idea being that we were, quote, taken care of by our families. If we weren't taken care of by our families, we were oftentimes institutionalized. And what would generally end up happening is we would live out our lives either, with our families, if we had them, with our, friends who would take our, plight on, I guess it was, as it were, or like I say, we would live out our lives in institutions types.
That kind of depended where you were. If you were in a place like New York City, that might happen to you. On the other hand, you had more opportunities as well if you were willing to take them.
Yes.
And if you lived out in, let's say North Dakota. North Dakota hired blind people to come from other states to teach school.
Oh, yes.
Until it became really populated. And then pretty soon the blind guys were out of a job and moving back and tuning pianos back where they came from.
Right, exactly.
But if a blind person had some chutzpah, especially when we were opening up new territories, if you couldn't get people to come out and a blind guy was willing to come out and teach school, heck, they'd hire them. And some did well at it. Many ended up, like I said, going back to the states that they came from and maybe opening up a store or tuning pianos or something like that.
Did you ever hear of this guy named High Rise Joe?
Yeah, Joe and Gracia. Yes.
Yeah. Joey Garcia.
Oh man. Okay. I wonder I didn't even know his last name because he went on KWBZ for a little bit and then it just disappeared. And then I'm just like, whatever happened to that guy?
I don't know when you're talking about knowing him, but I knew him when he was living in Minneapolis back in the, I guess, late 80s, early 90s, before I left there.
Okay. Well, they made it sound like he was here somewhere, but
he had been here in Colorado.
Yeah.
Okay.
In the 70s. I don't know when he left Colorado for sure.
He was a jock for
KWBZ.
Yeah, that.
Yeah.
And then didn't he also work for KYGO for a bit, or maybe not?
He might have. And then I guess, I thought he was going to, work for the phone company because of his unique qualities there. Okay.
Say, Peg, I've got a quick question before we get quite to the end of the show. The unemployment rate within the blind community, we historically have well, I wouldn't say enjoyed, but we've had a rather high unemployment rate where if in any other demographic of society the unemployment rate was that high, why there'd be some moving and shaking going on, let me tell you.
Well, I'll tell you that back to that 1910 census, 60% of blind people were employed and living without any kind of financial assistance from family, friends, charity, or government. Now,
And that's why I bring that up. Go ahead.
Now, they did not live in the conditions that we would consider livable by today's standard. However, they were
Right,
not living in conditions that were different from some of the other sighted people.
Yes.
They were living in shanties. They were living, above somebody's barn. But they were working as most of the men were working in agriculture on farms.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But yes, most of the blind people back in 1910, you got to understand there was no Social Security. There was no state pension for blind people or state welfare for blind people. You had to get it either from the city or county you lived in, from their charity, from the government, the local government, which you didn't want to do, because what would happen is your name would go in the paper as receiving, $8 a month or $20 a month from the county. And when that happened, your family was shunned at church. So
Is that right?
break away from your family if you were going to do that. But also your options were, if you couldn't find a way to support yourself or family wouldn't take care of you, were to go to a poor farm, which in some ways was far more dangerous than the jail. And I've got news articles where blind beggars have come into town and just kind of reported to the police department, "Hi, I'm here to beg, lock me up," because it was safer for them to sleep in jail than it was to go to the poor farm. So you have to understand where the history was at the time. So even though the unemployment rate was much higher, the employment and income they had just barely supported them. And yet they sometimes would raise families of 8 to 10 children on it. They got along, with a lot less. The times were very different, but the attitudes were very, very different. It was very shameful in many communities to take the welfare money or the charity money from the county or the church fund. Because it meant that your family was not living up to their responsibilities.
Yes.
And so on. So, yeah. So you have to take that into consideration too, when looking at those statistics, because they didn't have money to buy a house, many of them. And yet we will find in the 1880s, 1890s, early 1900s, blind guys who had very nice homes because they were a doctor, they were a lawyer, they were respected in the community, they ran their own businesses. Those, of course, were few and far between. But if you lived in a big city, especially on the East Coast, there were all of the institutions for the blind, where there was the broom shop on the first floor, and then you lived in the rooms above. And those sometimes could house a couple hundred people. Yeah,
absolutely. Hey, do you know what the current unemployment rate is in 2021?
It's a little less than 70%, I'm told.
That's
seems to keep that plateau. It's just
the ADA was supposed to make it better, and it didn't really happen. Technology was a really great thing when it first came around and made things more accessible, and now it's making things much more difficult.
That's for sure.
If you are a state employee and you can't even enter the time sheets for the people who you supervise, that doesn't make you a very good employee for the state, and pretty soon you're not doing that either. So yeah, it's kind of difficult sometimes. Technology is what keeps us out sometimes.
Oh, so I'm just looking at this. Do you think, I know we were probably part of the percentage of the 10% that read Braille. Do you think that has something to do with the literacy? Because we tend to lean on that technology so much. And
Oh, most like it does.
Yeah.
And it's different for different points and in time as well. I mean, we have, because blind children, they don't see what's they don't see what's printed out. They don't see the formatting. They have no idea how to put together a properly formatted letter, paper, etc. When blind people got an education back in, say, 1920, 1930, they could go to college because they were able to, take their own notes, and that when they got to college, they would finish their degrees, and oh my gosh, they were far more educated in many cases than the rest of their families. And I have one man, for example, from Maryland. He was born to a family of freed blacks. They were not slaves even in the 1840s and 50s, not that family. But they were not educated. They were farmers. They did okay. He went blind and was sent to the Maryland School for the Blind, which did not teach as much as it did for the white kids as it did for the blacks. There were two separate schools.
Oh my.
But when he left the school, he could read and write. And he was sold newspaper. What he ended up doing mostly for the later part of his, the last 25 years of his life, was selling newspapers. But he was the person in his town, part of his black congregation, who could read the Bible. He read information that he would get from other sources to his congregation. He encouraged his congregation to get out there and vote. You exercise your right to vote. He educated them on the issues because he had people reading him the newspaper. He understood more about reading. So in a sense, his blindness made him better off than a lot of the people that he knew in his community because he could read where many of them could not.
Yeah, you know what I found out, and this is kind of offshoot of this. When I was in LA, I don't know if it was like a code between the gang members and all that kind of stuff, but I could be around, and I was sitting in a bus stop, and these gang members they went at it, and it was almost like I was invisible, because I'm like he's off limit. We can fight and do all that kind of stuff.
That's a very interesting. Wow.
I heard that a lot about Detroit too, is that if you were a blind guy walking down the street and you were the wrong color in the wrong neighborhood, that the gang people, they left you alone, or even some protected you.
Yeah.
That's not so much the case anymore. I think as blind people, we've sort of been elevated a little bit higher.
No, we're no longer second-class citizens in that, right?
We're not always.
We have indeed achieved first-class citizenship.
In that regard,
about 10 years ago,
yeah.
I was on my way home. Well, no, it's probably about 20 years ago now. I was on my way home from work, and it was pretty late, and I was down at the light rail station. And some jackleg decided he wanted to take my money and do all this crazy things. And, I grew up as a biker. My dad was the real deal, not a weekend warrior, but I mean,
he was a biker.
Yeah, he was the real deal. So, I learned young, you either learn how to battle or you get your butt kicked all the time. And, me being a blind guy, I didn't want to be thought of as a wimp, even though I'm a little guy. And so I learned. And so when the guy decided he wanted my stuff, I just took away his weapon, told him it's probably in his best interest to go ahead and move along, and just kept cranking on his wrist. And then pretty soon the light rail came, and I made sure that he was down, and I jumped onto that train, and off it sped, man.
No, that's fun. That's fun. And when I was 21, me and my friend, when he was 19, we used to play this game where I'm in the bathroom, wash my hand, then he would come in and jump me and grab me by the neck, and then it was my job to get him off me. And it was just, we're young guys. We like to
Having a good time.
tussle and stuff like that stuff. And I remember I told this one line lady, say, we were telling them what we did. And she had this weird look on her face. She says, I wouldn't know what I would do. And I said, well, you better figure that out, because once it's happening, you have to jump into action.
It is, it's one of the things I think that in the last, especially 50 years, we have sheltered too many of our blind children, teens.
Oh, yes.
A little
I've got
too
to
much.
Yeah.
Because, back in 1900, you had to sink or swim. The family farm depended on everybody pulling their weight. You had to be out there and doing your fair share.
Right.
Yes, we had a lot of blind people that were shoved in back rooms and things like that. But I think we also had, especially the younger ones, they had to fend for themselves. If they were fortunate to be sent away to a school for the blind, they were gone 9 months out of the year from their family.
Yes.
On their own. And, kids are kids. They're kind of nasty at times.
Oh, yeah.
And you had to learn to survive with no family to back you up. I think that made some of us a little stronger back then, because we weren't coddled as much.
Right.
But I think now, especially since 94-142, where blind kids could go to the schools of their choice, I'm sure we can find a fair amount of, every time you say this is the way it was, you'll find a half a dozen people to refute you. And that's the way history is.
That's absolutely.
Which is why I never say this is the first blind person to do XYZ, because I'll find a new one later on. But public school, it was hard to break into public schools as some of the blind kids. But I think for a lot of them, they were far more coddled than had they gone to the schools for the blind.
Interesting.
Yeah. And I enjoyed like the integration of being at a school, because I could have went to the Colorado Springs one, but this lady named Miss Chambers, and I could still remember it, because she came in and she said, she told my mother, Johnny belongs in a home. And my mother had to say, Johnny is in a home.
That's awesome.
So this concept of, I know better. I guess maybe some parents said, okay, maybe you do. But and then I know some kids that, they had such bad experiences. Some of them, they changed their name because they were afraid that the people that were at those schools would find them. But I said, wow, that's
crazy.
pretty interesting.
Wow.
And there was a move in the early 1900s for about 30 some years anyway, called the Sunshine Homes, where these nice society women would go around and visit in communities, find people who had these blind babies, and convince the parents that it was too difficult for them to raise a blind child, and they would take their children away and bring them to these, they were called the Sunshine Homes.
Yeah.
And they raised a lot of money for these homes. And, some of them, they maybe would have had they had better opportunities there, but here you're just taken away from your families. Some of them did go back to their families, but there were a bunch of them that were basically just dumped off at the state schools for the blind. And here you go. They're now ward of the state because they're separated from the families. The parents gave them up. Okay, I gave them up. I'm not going to think about them anymore.
I don't know. I don't know how many times I've
heard
heard that story. It's just it's heartbreaking.
It is a sad situation to see what happened to some of those kids.
Yeah.
But it is part of history. And folks, if you like this type of stuff, you like this type of content, we need to keep the lights on.
Oh, yeah.
How do we do that, Johnny?
Well, can I tell you just one thing? If you want to be
go
a
ahead.
part of my email list, shoot
Definitely.
me an email at theblindhistorylady@gmail.com. That's all one word, theblindhistorylady@gmail.com.
gmail.com.
And get on my email list or check out my new book, Don Mahoney Television Star, on Amazon.com, written by Peggy Chong.
Yeah. I definitely want to get
I
that
gotta
on
check
Kindle.
that out.
I gotta get that on Kindle. Yeah. But I see I saw this person who just subscribed to our Twitch, and I think it can't be Judge Judy, but I'm going to check that out, because that is Judge.
That'd be
Judy.
funny.
No, it's going to be interesting.
Hey,
So,
my sister was on Judge Judy one time. That's for a different show.
But PayPal.me/Innervision Denver is how you can donate, because it does cost money to do this kind of stuff, and we appreciate that. And then of course the compilation CD that's out, Innervision Compilation 2021. You can check that out. And then I wrote this book called 6 Shades of Blindness, which we're re-editing some stuff in there. And we're going to put out the second issue of the book, more refined and so forth like that. So we really get
so all those people that have bought the first edition, keep hold of that. That's going to be a collector.
Yeah, because you're gonna say, well, how come you? Why did you take out this part and this part? But, and then a lot of stuff I kept in, because I just thought, I'm a talk show host, and sometimes a little bit of controversy is kind of interesting. So it's not going to be
right.
It's not going to be that milk toast, but it is what it is. So anyway, and if you would like to be on the show, contact us at info@Innervision. FM, that's info@Innervisionfm.com, and listen to our station 24/7, 7 days a week, Innervision FM and Live 365. Now, give your contact information one more time for people who are running for their pen and all that kind of stuff.
Yep, it is theblindhistorylady@gmail.com. Somebody once jokingly called me that, and so
so you went ahead and made an account.
So theblindhistorylady@gmail.com, and shoot me an email and ask to get on my email list. And I send out an email every month about one of our new blind ancestors that I've found. Mm-hmm. And I have a book up at on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and it's Don Mahoney, the Television Star. That I have published. It's about a blind guy from Texas who had to keep his blindness a secret so that he could become a television star, and he did become a television star.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting type of thing. A lot of people have done that. They've kind of tried to keep their blindness a secret so that they could become actors, journalists even.
Yeah. When I was in Channel 12, people, when they met me in person, they said, we didn't know that you were blind. We just thought you were wearing sunglasses to be cool. And I said, oh, okay. so it's pretty interesting.
You say, I am.
Yeah,
right. I am wearing it to be cool.
Oh, definitely. Well, actually, thank you for coming on, and really
thanks,
appreciate
Peggy.
your time. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. God bless.